I'm Edwin Warfield, the publisher of City Biz, and I'm honored today to interview Dr. Greg Hobelmann, who's the co-CEO and president of Ashley Addiction Treatment. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So following medical school, you chose anesthesia and pain management, and then around 2008, you developed an addiction to alcohol and opioids. Tell us about your personal journey and the role of Ashley Addiction Treatment.
Ashley's played a huge role in my life. As you said, after medical school, I went into anesthesiology and did a fellowship in pain management. Was practicing for a few years doing interventional pain management. And it was during that time that I did develop an addiction to opioids and alcohol primarily. And I went to treatment for the first time in 2009. And then shortly after that, in my early, first attempt at recovery, I came up here to Ashley to work as a staff physician. And unfortunately, I didn't stay sober after that initial treatment, but I was up here and I fell in love with Ashley. I loved everything about it. The people that were here, the location, and the work that was being done. I actually really enjoyed working with this patient population and seeing them get better. There's really nothing more gratifying than seeing somebody get well, after suffering from a substance use disorder. Now, I went back to treatment in 2011 after a relapse. And at that point, I was in pretty hot water, with regard to my license. I had a suspended license for a couple of years and ended up going back and getting a master's degree in public health. And then following that, I did a residency in psychiatry. I really wanted to kind of do something that I was interested in that was beneficial on both a personal and professional standpoint. And so I completed that residency, and it was in my third year of that residency that I was invited to come back to Ashley, or it was thought of as a possibility. And it was really exciting for me because I had fallen in love with the place, and the thought of coming up here and building a career was something very exciting to me. And the thought that Ashley would have me back after leaving to go to treatment, was pretty amazing to me. And that's the kind of place that this is. It's a place of redemption. And so I've been back since 2016, and certainly haven't regretted it one bit.
Can you tell us who John Lipsey was and the role that he played in relaunching your career?
Sure. John's a wonderful guy. He was, at the time, he was the program director for psychiatry at Hopkins. And he really, along with others, but he gave me an opportunity. And when it was through a friend who introduced me to Dr. Lipsey. And just as a possibility, I thought, was there any chance of me actually getting into a residency? Again, because I had the issues with my license and so forth, I didn't know if it was a possibility. And so I met with John Lipsey and Graham Redgrave, another wonderful man who was the associate director at the time, and had a conversation with them for an hour and a half or so. And they said, it sounds like your recovery is pretty good and we'd be interested. And so we kind of had to build a case for why a program, and why Hopkins would take a risk on somebody with issues when they have plenty of applicants. So we really had to build, so to speak, a case, and to some extent it was completing my amends process, because I had to get a lot of letters from previous from partners and from previous program directors and people that I worked with. And luckily, all of them were supportive as well. But John helped me to create that case for why they would even consider me. And then ultimately, Ray DiPaolo, who was the chairman at the time, said, I'll be responsible for this guy if he enters into our program. So John got it started, and I owe such a debt of gratitude to him and many other people along the way that really have stuck their neck out to help me out.
So you started as a staff physician, and then in 2018, you became chief clinical officer. Walk us through that period.
So I actually came back in 2016 as a staff psychiatrist.
Right.
So I was retrained in psychiatry, and came back. The previous medical director was a psychiatrist, and she had been a medical director here for 20 plus years at the time. Wonderful woman named Bernadette Salunius, and I was good friends with her husband as well, who actually taught at Hopkins at the time, Stuart Teagle. And And so I came to be a staff psychiatrist. Again, I was invited back. And so it's responsible for mostly just the clinical care of patients, not just dual diagnosis, but a variety of anything from a psychiatric, psychological standpoint. I saw those patients along with a couple of psychologists that we had and Dr. Salunius. And that's where I started and stayed there for a couple of years before developing or taking on other roles. I first started out as becoming the director of the outpatient facilities here. And then over time, when Dr. Salunius was going to retire, we sort of switched roles. And I became the medical director here and then the chief medical officer, and then followed that with the co-CEO.
So can you provide a snapshot of Ashley addiction treatment today, the patients, the footprint, the impact?
Yeah, for sure. So we're really lucky. I mean, we are kind of the best of both worlds. We have a long tradition, 40 years old, started by wonderful founders, Father Joseph Martin and May Abraham. And they started Ashley as really an abstinence-based program in 1983 here on the property of what was the Tidings estate. So Senator Joe Tidings lived here with his family, and it's a beautiful location. So we're up at the top of the Chesapeake Bay by the Susquehanna River on the Susquehanna Flats. And we started here with the main building and then what was essentially the carriage house. And it's grown from there. So now we have a number of other buildings, including a really beautiful chapel that overlooks the water. But initially, this did start as a smaller abstinence-based program, and it's really grown quite a bit. And the idea is to really treat as many people as possible with the highest quality of care. So we do offer all levels of care at this facility here in residential. We have 121 beds, and then we have 2 outpatient programs, one in Cecil County at Union Hospital and one in Harford County at Upper Chesapeake, and then we have 2 extended care programs as well. So we have in our care at any given time somewhere between 400 and 600 patients, depending on what our census is. Of course, it took a little bit of a hit during COVID. To some extent on purpose. We wanted that to occur to make sure that we could distance and so forth. We're building back that census now. And we not only have all levels of care, but we're really interested in making sure that patients have access to care. So we take in-network insurance with almost all commercial insurances. At our outpatient locations, we also utilize Medicaid. And we give away quite a bit of what we call scholarship funds. So over the years, it's tens of millions of dollars in scholarship funds to people who couldn't afford this program. And then, with regard to medical care, we have physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nursing staff, psychologists, psychiatrists, and a really strong counseling staff to provide the level of care, ultimately that we want to for our patients.
And can you share a little bit, do a little more history related to Father Martin and his colleague May Ashley Abraham? Tell us about their background.
Sure. So Father Martin was a Catholic priest, grew up in Baltimore, and a pretty beloved guy. Developed an addiction to alcohol and got sober. And when he was getting sober, one of the roles, there were some changing roles of priests during the time. And so he ended up with a role of educating or education about substance use disorder, primarily alcoholism at the time. And he had a way of describing what occurs in alcoholism that was pretty amazing. And so ultimately he had put together videos and worked for the military and became really, a beloved figure in the world of alcohol treatment. And so those, this to some degree, this Ashley, was built on that fame that he had. Those videos and his chalk talks, as they're called, are still viewed around the world. They're still viewed at many other treatment facilities. And he would give these talks. And one of the talks was when May was trying to get sober, and she went down there and heard him speak. And it was sort of the changing point for her. She was from Carolina and moved up here several years before. And when she got sober, she and Father Martin developed a really wonderful relationship and ultimately came up with the idea of starting a facility. And that's how this place began. And what they went through was amazing in terms of raising the funds to buy the property and the work they put in to actually creating this facility. And really what their core philosophy was treating people with dignity and respect. So they have a place to come with just an overall healing environment. And then by treating people with dignity and respect and creating connections, that's how they ultimately got better. And then it's kind of built and grown from there.
So the pandemic introduced many additional stressors into the lives of families and children. What has been the impact and how has Ashley Addiction Treatment responded to these new stressors?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I mean, if you look at the things like, alcohol sales and so forth, they're going through the roof. We look at comorbidity with depression and anxiety that has increased. I mean, to the point where greater than 50% of the population are describing symptoms of anxiety and depression. And during the actual pandemic, there were some limitations to receiving treatment. One thing that happened that was really positive is that everybody was forced to open virtual services and telehealth. So that has occurred at a rate that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. Now we have to figure out how to utilize that optimally. But in any case, we tend to see that patients waited a little bit longer to seek help. So they're coming in a little bit later stage of both the addiction as well as some of the comorbid issues that they might have. So that treating them is more challenging to some degree. And we have to make sure that we have the resources to do that and the skill set to do it. I think we're going to continue to see this for quite some time. I think that the people who need treatment, they're still not all seeking treatment, and there's some difficulties with regard to access. Of course, we're very interested in making sure that these doors are open to anybody who needs treatment. But people have to know it. People have to understand that treatment is available, what treatment is available, what does quality treatment look like. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity here with regard to educating the public about substance use disorders and then finding the appropriate treatment for them over time.
So you share the CEO title with Alex Denson, who is also a one-time patient. Tell us about his background and how you share these responsibilities.
Sure. So Alex got sober here at Ashley in the early 2000s, and over the years has had a variety of roles. As he would say, he sort of grew up here at Ashley. And in doing that, he created a large network, got to know treatment very well. He knows a lot of different programs, a lot of different people, and again, has had a lot of different roles in treatment. He and I have known each other since I first got here back in 2009 and developed a friendship. And we've spoken a lot about treatment and where we want treatment to head in the future. What do we need to do to improve it? How do we improve Ashley? And so sort of as I was on my pathway since 2016 here, he was as well. And he really ended up in the business development side. And he's a hard worker, incredibly intelligent guy, and he thinks very well. And so we had gone through a couple of transitions with regard to CEOs, and before we started, the interim CEO was Dave Nassif. Dave was a board member for many years, and he stepped in the chair of the board for many years, and he stepped into a variety of roles over time to fill in. And he was in the role as co-CEO, as a CEO, and he came up with the idea of having a co-leadership model. And the idea was that you have someone who can really focus on the patient services side, which is me, and then have somebody who's really looking from the business development side, which is Alex, and we marry those two, having the same vision. So we took about a year of preparation, working with some coaches just to get us ready for the position before we started. And that was in March a year ago.
And you had some expansion plans recently. You opened the Clubhouse at Ashley in Aberdeen earlier this year. Can you tell us about the Clubhouse?
Yes, the Clubhouse. The idea for the Clubhouse was that there were grants available for a Clubhouse. Now, the idea is to look at younger people, adolescents, who have any sort of challenge that might predispose them to having a substance use disorder, or there's substance use disorder in their family, and they're in difficult times. And we create a place for them to become educated, to spend their time, and so over the past year and a half or so, we've been building the Clubhouse. Harford County has been very helpful because funds also have come through Harford County to help us out. And we were looking at everything from locations to how do we do this well. And so we're now building that. We have the physical location, and which just opened fairly recently. And we've had several participants already that have enrolled. But the idea of it is we know very well how to treat patients with substance use disorders, and we can do that on an individual basis quite well. We have to really pay more attention to prevention. And so this is really our first true attempt to get into prevention. And from the Clubhouse, we're looking to get a greater involvement in schools, in churches, and in any area where we could be a positive impact to the community to really set the stage for prevention in the best way that we know how now. We'll have a lot to learn over time, but as we learn, we'll grow and we'll shift and we'll change to try to provide the need to fill the needs for the community.
And telehealth is part of that solution?
For the Clubhouse? So we did start with telehealth. Yeah, we didn't have a physical location, so we used telehealth initially. And then now we have a physical location so people can come, but we're going to be using telehealth across the board for whatever we do. We want to figure out how to use it well, and use it in a way that works. And so the world is figuring that out right now, without a doubt. We're going to figure and learn what is effective and what's not effective. To some extent, can be some difficulty building rapport and creating engagement and so forth. But in another way, you can increase access and it's more convenient. So if we can figure out, and the rest of the world can figure out how to really utilize telehealth services well, these are going to continue to be used and hopefully used in a way that's really effective.
You recently wrote a paper on opioid use and the impact of fentanyl. What were some of the highlights of your research?
So that particular paper was looking at fentanyl clearance. So fentanyl is thought of as a short-acting opioid. It doesn't last long. It's metabolized very quickly. But if you look at the pharmacological properties of it, you can use it at higher doses. It is what we call lipophilic, and that means that it likes fat and can be stored in the fat cells. So over time, as you use it more, it's distributed into those fat cells, and it can take a lot longer to be excreted. And that has implications. So if someone thinks that you're going to have a negative urine screen a day after using fentanyl and you continue to be positive, you can imagine the legal implications, the treatment implications. We're also wondering how much this is going to affect starting medications like naltrexone or buprenorphine. So this was just an informational study saying, look, the clearance can last up to 3 weeks, is what we noticed in patients. And it's just information that we really want to have and to know. And from that, we can build, and find out what the clinical implications might be.
So if on your website, you've got a couple articles on mental wellness. So what are the 5 steps we can do to improve our mental wellness? Yeah,
I think if you're looking at, this is not necessarily an evidence-based, research type of answer, but there are some really key basic things that you can think about. One is you have awareness that there is an issue. And I'll tell you, awareness is something that people really don't have. They find themselves stuck. They're not sure what's going on. So, have the awareness of it. Number 2 is seek help. You don't have to do this alone. you absolutely are not alone, and there are solutions to the problems that we have. Number three is engage, in that help process and throw yourself into it, whatever it might be. And for each person, it should be individualized. So for some people, having a true routine and changing a perspective is what's needed. For others, it might be using medications and taking larger steps for whatever change is there. And then number four is figuring out how to sustain that. What does the program look like for you? Because these are not issues that tend to be fixed and go away. They are things that will persist over time. So you really do want to have some sort of plan for sustaining that. And number five is keeping your mind open so that whatever might be suggested, it's worth trying and seeing, as you continue your journey of recovery or getting into better health, whatever it might be. Keep your mind open to what is working for others and give it a shot yourself and see what works. But you really do have to remain engaged in this for the long term.
So can you share the strategic growth plans for Ashley addiction treatment? What's on the horizon?
Sure. So there are quite a few things we're looking to do. Number one, we're evaluating all that we do, making sure that it's evidence-based. And then as we learn of new interventions, we're going to implement them and utilize them to the best of our ability. We are truly looking at building a research center here, and we have really good foundation and infrastructure for that. We do need to build the actual facility, but we partner with faculty from Hopkins. We have people on our staff, and we have a variety of research assistants that are working here that are not only implementing new studies and publishing papers, but looking at our own internal outcome data, which is so very important. We all have to do that. So we've implemented a program called Track 9 that looks at from a patient report, self-report, how they're doing over time. And now we're looking at using biometrics as well as an objective measure of recovery. And then there are a variety of other studies that we're going to be continuing and bringing on over time. With that, we want to have a true continuum of care. So we want to offer all levels of care, and we would like to see people remain engaged for at least up to a year with us. And we know one of the few outcomes that we're pretty certain about is that continued engagement improves outcomes without a doubt. And we can't just discharge someone after 28 days and say, good luck to you. We have to continue to keep them engaged and make sure that we're following them over time, that we're there to help them when needed. And that we have all levels of care. So we fit somebody into the level of care that is needed. We do that through an assessment. And if they need more care, they can step their level of care up. And if they need less, they go through that process. And so our mindset is not about just growth for growth's sake. What we're looking to do is really grow our sphere of influence, have a greater impact from a public health standpoint. So get information out there, really help to change the field of addiction medicine and be thought leaders in that process. And that can include, where we fit in from a political standpoint. Can we have, a say or some impact with regard to what the policy and legislation might be? So we really do want to grow that way rather than just growing for growth's sake. And of course, there will be opportunities to take those opportunities to grow so that we can treat more people on an individual basis. But ultimately, we think that growth through the sphere of influence will be what has the greatest impact.
So is there any other part of your personal journey or the Ashley addiction treatment story that you'd like to share that you haven't shared with us?
Well, I think, from my own personal story, it is one, my loyalty to Ashley is because Ashley is a wonderful place. It's because what I've seen here and what goes on here is first thing first is how do we impact the patients? And how do we, they are always on the front of our minds. And that's the question that we ask all the time. So my love for that came from not only, looking at patients and treating them the best, but also how do we treat our staff and how do we treat each other? And this place is a place of redemption, and my loyalty comes very much from the fact that I left here in a horrible condition, was invited to come back and given that second chance. From a personal standpoint, I was at a very low point in my life. I had, luckily my wife did stay with me, and I had kids at the time, and I had support of family and friends. But when I went to my second treatment, my credibility was gone. People didn't trust me. People were upset with me, and I didn't have a medical license, so I had no idea what was going to happen. And by sticking with a program of recovery and really continuing to work on that and being patient through it, wonderful things have happened in my life. And that is the case for anybody suffering from a substance use disorder. There are certain circumstances, no matter what your age is, what your gender is, what your race is, what your economical situation in life is. There are ways that through recovery to improve your life dramatically. I'm a good example of that. And the examples are everywhere. And I just want to send that message of hope to people because it can happen, and it does happen all the time.
Well, I know my father's looking down at me from heaven because he got his redemption with Father Martin. And I know that Father Martin played such a critical role in his life. So, Gregory, I want to thank you for your time and telling your story.
Thank you, Evan. Pleasure. Appreciate it.